The cold seeped into every corner of the small home, curling its icy fingers into the man's toes even before he fully woke. He lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling as if hoping the morning light would somehow chase the chill away, but the faint glow through the curtains did little to change the biting cold. The winter had been harsher than usual this year, with the wind howling like some invisible predator outside his window, rattling the thin panes and sending a shiver through the floorboards. Each creak of the old wood under the weight of the house sounded louder, more brittle than it had ever seemed, almost as if the house itself were complaining about the cold. He pulled the thin blanket closer, but it was no use. His feet, always the first to feel the winter as cruelty, were ice cold despite the thick socks he wore. He had tried everything: heaters, rugs, slippers, even old-fashioned foot warmers, but nothing seemed to make the chill recede entirely. The floor had always been unforgiving, a harsh, unyielding surface that reflected the cold straight up through his soles. Some mornings, he had nearly convinced himself that stepping onto it without socks was akin to walking across shards of ice. On one particularly harsh morning, as he sat on the edge of the bed and rubbed his aching feet, an idea began to form in his mind. It was unusual, almost absurd at first, and he dismissed it immediately. As he went through his routine, the thought refused to leave. What if he could create a layer between himself and the cold floor? Not just a rug, not just a heater underfoot, but an actual second floor, something that would act as a barrier and trap warmth beneath it. He visualized the concept in his mind, running his hands along the imaginary wooden planks, imagining a hidden layer of insulation nestled underneath. The image was so vivid it almost felt real, almost tangible. He sat there for a long time, contemplating the logistics. How could he lift the existing floor without demolishing it? Where would he get the materials? Could he ensure that the new floor would be sturdy enough to support his weight, and that it would cause the house to creak or buckle under pressure? Each question seemed to invite another, spinning into a labyrinth of technical concerns. But amidst all these practical doubts, a spark of excitement flickered. For the first time that winter, he felt hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, he had stumbled upon a solution that no one else had considered. The next day, he began pacing through his small home, measuring the existing floorboards, mentally calculating the space and dimensions. He scribbled notes on scraps of paper, drawing crude diagrams of how the additional layer might fit. He imagined layers of insulation, the wooden planks above them, and the warmth that would be trapped underneath. It was almost like constructing a miniature world beneath his feet, a hidden sanctuary of heat that only he would know about. Word of his project quickly reached the neighbors, as it inevitably would. It was difficult to keep such an unusual endeavor private, especially in a small neighborhood where everyone knew each other as business. They began to watch him curiously from their windows, shaking their heads at the sight of him carrying lumber and insulation through the snow-laden streets. Some of the neighbors even crossed over, ostensibly to chat, but the questions they asked were laced with skepticism, with veiled laughter hidden behind polite concern. "You are really going to put another floor on top of this one?" one of them asked, raising an eyebrow. "Why not just get a rug or a heater? Seems like a lot of trouble." He smiled faintly, not yet ready to divulge his full plan. "I have my reasons," he said simply, shrugging. There was no point in explaining. He knew that most of them would not understand the logic behind his idea. The mocking began subtly at first. Whispered comments as they passed by, chuckles when they thought he was, to looking, sideways glances that clearly said, "He's lost it." As days went by and he continued gathering materials, the laughter grew bolder. Some neighbors even left small, sarcastic, gift-sold slippers, thick socks, or portable heaters as if to say, "You don't need your crazy floor idea. Here, try these." But he accepted none of it. He became accustomed to their scrutiny, developing a quiet resilience. Each morning, he would carry the first few planks of wood from the truck to his home. Stepping carefully on the frozen ground, the wind biting at his face. He would glance at the neighbors, some leaning lazily against their fences, watching him like he was a sideshow attraction. Their laughter sometimes followed him as he went about his work, but he had begun to tune it out. The cold had hardened his determination in more ways than one, teaching him that perseverance often involved ignoring the noise of others. Inside, he began experimenting with small prototypes. On a corner of the existing floor, he laid down a piece of insulation and a scrap of wood, stepping on it to feel the difference. The change was subtle, but it was enough to convince him that the concept had merit. His excitement began to grow, mingled with a sense of anticipation that made the cold almost bearable. Every small success, every minor improvement, strengthened his resolve. Neighbors noticed these experiments and shook their heads even more vigorously. "Still at it, huh?" One called out over the fence one afternoon. "You were going to make the floor so high we'll need a ladder to get in next time?" The comment drew a round of laughter from others, and he felt the familiar sting of ridicule. But he reminded himself why he was doing this, picturing the warmth that would soon greet his bare feet, imagining the comfort that would make the winter, as bite irrelevant. He began to study insulation techniques, reading everything he could find in old construction manuals and online guides. He learned about thermal barriers, air gaps, and the importance of sealing edges. He took careful notes, plotting how each layer of the new floor would be installed, how each plank would be fastened, and how the insulation could be compressed just enough to be effective without compromising the strength of the floor. Every detail mattered. Every mistake could ruin the project or worse, create a floor that might collapse under pressure. Despite the meticulous planning, he felt a growing sense of urgency. Winter was advancing, and with each passing day, the cold seeped deeper into the house. He worked late into the night, measuring, cutting, and planning, often stopping only to warm his hands over a small stove. Outside, the wind continued to howl, rattling the house. But inside, he felt a small warmth of anticipation. Each step he took toward gathering the materials, each note scribbled on paper, brought him closer to the vision he had imagined. By the end of the week, he had accumulated enough materials to begin the actual construction: planks of wood neatly stacked, rolls of insulation tightly bound, nails and screws sorted carefully into jars. The workshop corner of his home looked like a small construction site, chaotic yet organized in its own way. He could hear the neighbors whispering as they passed by. "Still it," someone muttered. "When will he give up?" But he did not plan to give up. The vision of warm, comfortable feet was more powerful than any doubt or ridicule. He spent the following days preparing the floor, testing small sections of insulation, moving pieces of wood around to see how they might fit. The neighbors continued to laugh, their skepticism never waning, yet he began to feel a quiet satisfaction in proving to himself that the idea was feasible. In the solitude of his home, he imagined the moment when the floor would finally be complete, and he could walk across it barefoot, free from the icy sting of winter. Late one evening, as he sat on the edge of the existing floor with a small lamp casting a warm glow over his sketches, he allowed himself a rare moment of daydreaming. He pictured himself stepping onto the new floor, feeling a rush of warmth rise through his feet. He imagined the neighbors peering through their windows, their laughter replaced by disbelief and awe. The thought brought a small smile to his face, and he allowed himself to revel in the anticipation. He knew that the project would not be easy. There would be challenges, mistakes, and setbacks. The floor might creak, the insulation might not fit perfectly, and the neighbors. Ridicule might intensify, but he also knew that the reward, a warm, comfortable home, a simple joy he had been denied for so long, was worth every effort. Each plank he would lay, each layer of insulation he would install, was a step toward reclaiming comfort and proving that ingenuity and determination could overcome even the harshest winters. As he finally lay down that night, exhausted but filled with purpose, he felt a flicker of excitement that was almost painful in its intensity. He had started with a simple desire to keep his feet warm, but it had grown into a full-fledged plan, a challenge to both himself and the skepticism of those around him. The laughter of the neighbors, once sharp and biting, had begun to fade into the background, replaced by a quiet determination that was stronger than any ridicule. He drifted off to sleep, imagining the warmth yet to come, the cold no longer seeming quite so formidable. Outside, the wind continued to howl, the snow drifted against the windows, and the world remained indifferent to his plans. But inside, a quiet revolution was taking place, one layer of wood and insulation at a time. And in that moment he felt certain that the world, cold and mocking as it seemed, would soon be forced to acknowledge the brilliance of a simple man and his unusual, ingenious solution. The morning air was crisp, carrying the unmistakable sting of frost that had settled overnight. Sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, casting elongated shadows across the small, modest room. The man rose from his bed, stretching his stiff limbs, and immediately felt the cold bite at the soles of his feet. The floor, as always, seemed determined to sap the warmth from his body the moment he stepped on it. For a fleeting moment he considered staying under the blanket, but the thought of the project waiting for him spurred him into action. Today he would begin the preparatory work, the first tangible steps toward transforming his cold, unforgiving floor into a hidden layer of warmth. He dressed quickly, layering clothes against the chill, and moved toward the small pile of materials he had accumulated over the past week. Lumber, insulation rolls, and various tools were stacked neatly in the corner, an organized chaos that reflected his meticulous mind. Each piece had been selected with care, measured and remeasured, to ensure it would fit perfectly when the time came to construct the floor. The task ahead was not simply about laying wood. It was a delicate operation that required precision, patience, and a thorough understanding of the structure beneath his feet. Before beginning the construction, he needed to prepare the existing floor. Dust, debris, and minor imperfections had to be addressed, and every corner had to be cleaned to create a stable foundation. He retrieved a broom, sweeping the floor methodically, listening to the soft scrape of bristles against wood. Each sweep seemed to symbolize a clearing of doubt, a cleansing of skepticism that the neighbors were sure to offer. As he worked, he could already imagine the murmurs from the windows across the street, the sideways glances, and the faint snickers. He did take care. His mind was focused entirely on the warmth that would soon embrace his feet. Next came the small but essential task of leveling the floor. Years of use had left minor unevenness in the planks, subtle dips and rises that could compromise the integrity of the new layer. He fetched a spirit level and painstakingly checked each section, marking areas that needed adjustment. Some planks required slight sanding, others needed reinforcement with small wooden wedges. The work was painstaking, almost meditative in its repetition, and it offered him a quiet space to think. He imagined each plank as a piece of a larger puzzle, each adjustment a step closer to comfort, a step toward proving the ingenuity of his idea. Neighbors began to notice the increased activity. They leaned lazily against fences, watching as he measured, adjusted, and swept. Their faces were etched with disbelief, their laughter a low, constant hum in the background. One of them, an older man with a habit of shaking his head at anything unconventional, called out, "Still at it, eh? You sure this isn't a bit much?" The man did respond. Words were unnecessary. He had learned early on that explanation often invites debate, and debate in this case meant ridicule. He returned to his work, placing small wedges under the uneven planks, checking alignment with meticulous care. The subtle creaks of the floor under his weight sounded like music to his ears, each one confirming that the surface was now stable enough to support the new construction. With the floor leveled, he moved on to laying the first layer of insulation. He had chosen a high-density material, one capable of trapping heat effectively without compressing under his weight. The rolls were unwieldy, stiff in the cold air, but he managed to unroll them with care, cutting them to fit the measured sections. The insulation hissed softly as he pressed it into place, conforming to the contours of the floor. Each section laid down seemed to promise warmth, a quiet rebellion against the harsh winter that had plagued his home for so long. During this process, he encountered his first technical challenge. One corner of the room, near the fireplace that had long since been decommissioned, had an irregular shape. The insulation refused to lie flat, bunching up in an awkward mound. He tried trimming it, pressing it down, but nothing seemed to fit perfectly. Frustration flickered briefly, a spark of doubt that threatened to undermine his resolve. He paused, taking a deep breath, and studied the corner carefully. After several adjustments, he realized that a small triangular piece of wood could create the perfect wedge for the insulation, allowing it to fit snugly. He cut the piece with precision, fitted it in place, and stepped back. The satisfaction of solving the problem was profound, a quiet victory that strengthened his confidence in the larger project. Meanwhile, the neighbors continued to watch. Some of them had begun whispering among themselves, their voices carrying just far enough to be heard. "He's really doing it," one said. "I told you it was crazy." Another chimed in who spends hours laying insulation in the middle of winter. "It's ridiculous." Their laughter was polite, tinged with disbelief, but he could hear it clearly. He ignored it, focusing instead on the tactile sensation of placing each piece, the soft resistance of the insulation under his hands, the faint smell of freshly cut wood that lingered in the air. By midday, he had completed the insulation layer. The floor, once cold and unwelcoming, now had a hidden warmth trapped within its foundation, though it was not yet perceptible to the touch. He took a moment to rest, sitting on the edge of the room and sipping from a cup of steaming tea. The warmth of the cup seeped into his hands, a temporary comfort that contrasted sharply with the icy air still seeping through the windows. As he drank, he allowed himself a brief mental rehearsal of the next steps, laying the frame for the new floor, measuring joists, and finally, placing the planks that would conceal the insulation and create a smooth, sturdy surface. The neighbors. Scrutiny intensified as the afternoon progressed. One woman, carrying a basket of laundry, paused at the fence and called out, "Are you sure this is going to work? It seems like a lot of effort for what?" He smiled faintly, acknowledging her question without answering. Words were unnecessary, the results would speak for themselves. He returned to his workbench, cutting smaller pieces of wood to reinforce the base where the insulation might compress unevenly. The work was tedious, requiring him to kneel on the floor for long stretches, his back aching from the posture. But each cut, each fitted piece, brought him closer to the moment when the floor would finally be complete. Even as he labored, he noticed subtle changes in the atmosphere. The sunlight shifted, casting golden hues across the room and the once oppressive cold seemed slightly more tolerable. Perhaps it was the promise of the project itself. Or perhaps it was simply the rhythm of his work, each motion methodical and purposeful. He realized that the act of preparation, leveling the floor, laying insulation, cutting support pieces, was as much about training his mind as it was about constructing the floor. Patience, precision, and perseverance were being cultivated with every task. By late afternoon, the first hints of evening crept into the room, shadows stretching long and deep across the floor. The man surveyed his work with quiet satisfaction. The floor was clean, level, and fully insulated, ready for the frame and planks that would soon transform it. He allowed himself a moment to appreciate the progress, recognizing that this stage preparation was crucial to the success of the entire project. Any misstep here could compromise the stability or effectiveness of the new floor. The neighbors, however, had not stopped watching. Some lingered outside as the sun dipped lower, their curiosity mixed with disbelief. One of the younger boys leaned against the fence, wide-eyed, whispering to a friend, "He is actually serious, he's going to do it." The friends laughed, though there was an unmistakable undertone of awe, a recognition that the man's determination was something extraordinary, even if they did not fully understand it. As evening approached, he began organizing the tools and materials for the next stage. Nails, screws, and brackets were sorted into small containers, each labeled for easy access. The lumber for the floor frame was stacked neatly along the wall, ready to be measured and cut. Even in the fading light, his meticulous nature shone through, every detail considered, every potential obstacle anticipated. By nightfall, he took a step back and allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. The house, once cold and uninviting, had already begun to change. The floor, insulated and prepared, was no longer a passive barrier against the cold, but an active participant in creating warmth. He could feel the difference even now, subtle though it was, a gentle promise of the comfort that awaited him. The neighbors, too, had begun to sense that something unusual was happening. The whispers and laughter had not entirely disappeared, but there was a new note of curiosity, a questioning edge to their commentary. Some even paused longer at the windows, watching as he meticulously organized his workspace, laying out the plans for the next day. They had seen many attempts at unconventional projects before, but something about his determination, his methodical approach, suggested that this one might actually succeed. As he finally prepared for bed, he felt the familiar sting of the cold floor beneath his feet, but also a newfound sense of accomplishment. Today had been about preparation, about laying the foundation for what was to come. It had been exhausting, both physically and mentally, but the satisfaction of progress was invigorating. He knew that the next day would bring new challenges, cutting and fitting the floor frame, placing the planks, ensuring stability, but he was ready. Lying in bed that night, he thought again of the neighbors. Their laughter, once sharp and biting, now seemed almost irrelevant. He had embarked on a path that few would understand, driven by a simple yet profound desire, warmth. The preparation was complete, and with it, the first step toward turning an unconventional idea into reality had been taken. The cold outside still raged, but inside, a quiet revolution had begun, and he was at the center of it. In the solitude of his home, surrounded by stacks of lumber and rolls of insulation, he allowed himself a small smile. The project was no longer just a dream, it was becoming tangible, inch by inch, layer by layer. And as he drifted into sleep, the anticipation of the next stage filled him with a quiet, steady warmth that no winter chill could touch. The next morning arrived with a sharp chill that cut through even the thickest layers of clothing. The man rose with determination, a quiet anticipation humming in his chest. Today was no longer about preparation or planning, it was about action, the tangible step that would turn concept into reality. His home, modest and unassuming, now bore the faint marks of progress. The floor had been cleaned, leveled, and insulated, ready to receive the framework that would support the second layer. Sunlight spilled across the room, reflecting off the smooth surfaces of the lumber stacked neatly in the corner. Tools gleamed faintly in the morning light, each one waiting to fulfill its role in the transformation to come. He started by measuring the space carefully once more, double-checking the dimensions to ensure that every joist would align perfectly. Precision was crucial. Even a small miscalculation could create instability or leave gaps that would compromise the insulation's effectiveness. He pulled out a measuring tape, stretching it along the floor, his eyes narrowing as he marked the spots where the supports would go. Each line drawn on the floor was a promise, a silent oath that the work would be executed flawlessly. With the measurements in hand, he began cutting the wooden joists to the required lengths. The saw buzzed as he worked, a rhythmic hum that filled the otherwise quiet room. The scent of fresh-cut wood mingled with the faint chill in the air, creating an atmosphere that was both invigorating and comforting. Each cut was deliberate, careful, ensuring straight edges and precise fits. He had spent weeks planning for this moment, and now every detail mattered more than ever. The neighbors were already beginning to notice the increased activity. Some leaned against fences, peering over with skepticism written plainly on their faces. "He's really doing it," one whispered to another, a hint of incredulity in their tone. "All that work for a floor?" Another added, "I wonder if he even knows what he's doing." Their laughter was muted at first, but it carried an edge of disbelief that seemed to linger in the crisp morning air. The man, accustomed to this scrutiny, paid no attention. He had learned that results spoke louder than words, and he intended to let the floor prove his ingenuity. He started by laying the first row of joists along one side of the room. Each beam was positioned carefully, leveled with a spirit level, and fastened securely to ensure stability. The weight of the wood pressed against his hands as he worked, a tangible connection to the effort that had gone into preparation. It was slow, meticulous work, requiring both patience and physical strength. As he knelt on the cold floor, adjusting each joist, he could feel the strain in his back and arms, but he welcomed it. Pain was temporary, the warmth he sought would endure. Once the first rowel was secured, he moved to the next, repeating the process with careful precision. Joist after joist was laid, forming a skeletal framework that would eventually support the new floor layer. With each addition, the room began to take on a sense of structure and order, a transformation that was both visible and symbolic. The invisible barrier against the cold was slowly becoming tangible. The neighbors? Skepticism seemed to intensify. Some shook their heads in disbelief, exchanging whispered remarks that carried both curiosity and mockery. "Look at him," one muttered, "kneeling there for hours, over a floor no one else would touch." Another laughed, shaking their head. "When it's done, maybe he'll walk across it and finally realize it. Still cold." Their words, intended as ridicule, only fueled his determination. He was building more than a floor. He was building proof that ingenuity and perseverance could overcome skepticism and discomfort. By midday, the basic framework was complete. The joists were evenly spaced, level, and securely fastened. The room now bore the outline of the new floor, a visible testament to hours of careful labor. He paused for a moment to assess his progress, running a hand along the smooth edges of the beams. The alignment was perfect, the structure sturdy. A quiet satisfaction settled over him, a sense of accomplishment that no external validation could match. Next came the insulation between the joists. He had already cut and fitted the insulation during preparation, but now it needed to be placed precisely between the beams. He carefully lifted each piece, pressing it into position so that it filled every gap and conformed to the contours of the framework. The material resisted slightly under his hands, but with patience, it settled snugly into place. He checked each section, ensuring that no space remained for cold to seep through. The insulation was no longer a separate layer. It had become an integral part of the new floor, a hidden reservoir of warmth waiting to be revealed. As he worked, the neighbors' interest seemed to shift subtly. Some had moved closer, peering over fences or through windows with growing curiosity. The laughter and ridicule persisted, but it was tinged with doubt now, a recognition that perhaps there was merit to his unconventional project. One of the younger neighbors, a boy with wide eyes and an insatiable curiosity, asked cautiously, "Will it really make the floor warmer?" He smiled faintly, acknowledging the question without giving a full answer. Words could not convey the sensation of the warmth to come. It was something that had to be experienced. He continued working, placing each insulation panel with care, pressing it down so that it would remain in place under the weight of the floor above. The next step was securing the floorboards. He had chosen high-quality planks, sturdy enough to withstand years of use while maintaining a smooth, level surface. Each plank was lifted carefully, aligned with the joists beneath, and fastened with nails and screws. The process was slow and deliberate, each placement requiring precision to ensure that the floor would not creak or buckle. He checked each plank with the spirit level, adjusting as necessary to maintain perfect alignment. As the day progressed, the transformation of the room became more apparent. The once cold, bare floor was now a solid, smooth surface, elevated slightly above its original level. The framework beneath remained hidden, but the effect was tangible. He could already sense the difference in how the room felt, the floor no longer seeming as harsh or unwelcoming. The anticipation of warmth filled him with a quiet satisfaction, a promise that the culmination of effort was nearing. The neighbors' reactions evolved as well. The whispers and laughter continued, but some began to exchange glances that conveyed confusion, even awe. "Maybe he's onto something," one muttered quietly. "Look at how sturdy that looks. I did to think it would hold up." Another nodded slowly, a hint of respect in his tone. I guess we'll see if it works. I still think it is crazy, though. The mixture of skepticism and intrigue lingered in the air, a subtle acknowledgement that the man's determination was beginning to command attention. By late afternoon, the majority of the floorboards were in place. He paused to assess his progress, stepping carefully across the partially completed surface. The boards felt solid underfoot, the hidden insulation below providing a slight cushioning effect. The floor was not yet complete, but the difference was perceptible even now. The sensation was subtle, a quiet promise of warmth that only he could feel fully at this stage. He continued working, securing the remaining planks, trimming edges to fit precisely against walls and corners. The process required both patience and skill, each adjustment a careful negotiation between practicality and perfection. By evening, the floor was fully installed, a seamless surface that concealed the hidden framework and insulation beneath. He stepped back, surveying the completed work, a sense of triumph swelling within him. The room, once cold and uninviting, now bore the marks of ingenuity and perseverance, a tangible manifestation of his vision. As night fell, the man allowed himself a moment of reflection. The day had been long and arduous, filled with physical exertion and meticulous attention to detail, but the results were undeniable. The floor, once a source of discomfort and frustration, had been transformed into a hidden layer of warmth, a secret reservoir of comfort that awaited discovery. The anticipation of experiencing that warmth firsthand filled him with a quiet exhilaration, a sense of satisfaction that transcended the physical labor. The neighbors, too, were beginning to recognize the significance of his efforts. Some continued to watch from a distance, their skepticism tempered by curiosity. One older woman, who had been particularly vocal in her ridicule, paused by the fence, her expression a mixture of disbelief and tentative admiration. "Well, I'll be," she murmured under her breath. "I did think he had it in him." Others nodded silently, their earlier laughter replaced by a quiet acknowledgement that the man's project was not only feasible but perhaps even ingenious. Despite the growing attention, he remained focused on the subtle details, ensuring that the floorboards were properly fastened, that edges were sealed, and that the surface was level and smooth. Each check, each adjustment, reinforced the integrity of the structure and the promise of warmth. By the time he finished, the room was transformed, a testament to meticulous planning, careful execution, and unyielding determination. As he prepared for bed that night, he allowed himself a rare moment of quiet satisfaction. The floor, now complete, concealed its hidden layers of insulation and framework, ready to deliver the comfort he had envisioned. The neighbors? Laughter had faded, replaced by a cautious curiosity that lingered in the cold night air. He knew that the ultimate test, the moment he would feel the warmth rise through his feet, was still to come, but the anticipation was almost as satisfying as the result itself. He lay in bed that night, exhausted but exhilarated, reflecting on the day's work. The transformation of the floor was not just a physical accomplishment, it was a symbolic victory, proof that ingenuity, patience, and determination could overcome skepticism and adversity. The cold outside remained relentless, but inside, a quiet revolution had taken place, and he was at its center. The floor, once a source of discomfort, was now a promise of warmth, a secret layer of comfort that awaited discovery. And as sleep finally claimed him, he imagined stepping onto the new floor the next morning, feeling the difference beneath his feet. He pictured the neighbors, expressions as they realized the effectiveness of his unconventional project, their laughter replaced by awe, and perhaps even a touch of envy. The day's labor had been arduous, but it had laid the foundation for a transformation that was both tangible and profound. The hidden floor, complete and sturdy, was a silent testament to the power of creativity, resilience, and the quiet satisfaction of a problem solved in one's own unique way. The morning light spilled through the thin curtains, illuminating the small, modest room in a soft golden hue. The man rose from his bed with a sense of anticipation that made the icy chill of the floor beneath his feet almost bearable. His muscles ached from the previous day. Labor, the detailed construction of the hidden framework and floorboards, leaving every joint and tendon reminding him of the effort he had exerted. Yet, he felt an undercurrent of excitement, a quiet thrill that today would be different. Today was not about preparation, not about construction. It was about finishing, refining, and perfecting the project that had occupied his every thought for weeks. He began by inspecting the floor from corner to corner, running his hand along the smooth wooden planks. They felt solid, even under the weight of his careful steps, yet he knew there were small adjustments to make. The edges needed sealing, some gaps required careful attention, and a few boards needed minor refinements to ensure a seamless surface. He fetched a small chisel and sandpaper, working slowly, deliberately, ensuring that each plank fit perfectly against the next. Each adjustment was meticulous, the kind of work that required patience, precision, and unwavering attention to detail. The room was quiet, save for the faint sound of scraping and sanding, but even in this solitude he felt the energy of progress humming through the space. Next, he turned to the ceiling of the floor. He had chosen a high-quality sealant, designed to preserve wood while preventing heat from escaping. Carefully, he applied it along the edges and seams, watching as it seeped into tiny gaps, filling imperfections that might allow the chill to penetrate. The smell of the sealant mingled with the faint scent of freshly cut wood and the lingering aroma of insulation, creating an atmosphere that was almost intoxicating. Each stroke of the brush seemed to carry the promise of comfort, the quiet assurance that the labor of weeks was about to be rewarded. While he worked, the neighbors began to notice the subtle differences in the room. Some leaned against the fences, peering in with increasing curiosity. The older woman from across the street, who had been particularly vocal in her earlier ridicule, now watched silently, her expression a mixture of disbelief and tentative respect. "He's really seeing this through," she murmured to a companion. The younger boy who had asked questions previously leaned closer, eyes wide with anticipation. "It's almost done," he whispered. "I wonder if it actually works." Their presence was constant yet unobtrusive, a silent acknowledgement that the man's project was nearing completion. He paused for a moment, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. From the initial idea, born from frustration with the cold floor, to the meticulous planning, gathering of materials, and painstaking construction, every step had been deliberate. The skepticism and laughter of neighbors had provided a steady background, a reminder of the unusual path he had chosen. Yet, their opinions had never deterred him. He had learned to focus on his goal, to trust in his own ingenuity, and now the reward was within reach. With the sealant applied, he turned his attention to the finishing touches. He sanded down any minor rough spots on the planks, ensuring a perfectly smooth surface. The floorboards, once raw and unyielding, now gleamed faintly in the morning light. Each plank fit seamlessly against the next, creating a continuous surface that was both aesthetically pleasing and structurally sound. He tested the stability, stepping carefully across the floor and listening for any creaks or signs of weakness. There were none. The construction was complete, solid, and prepared to fulfill its purpose. The next stage involved adding a final layer of insulation where needed. Although the majority had been integrated beneath the floorboards, small gaps and edges required attention to ensure maximum efficiency. He pressed insulation into these areas, shaping it to fit snugly and prevent heat from escaping. The act was repetitive, demanding, and required a level of precision that tested both patience and endurance. Yet, he found a quiet satisfaction in the work. Each adjustment was a step closer to warmth, each small improvement a testament to the value of meticulous effort. As he worked, he began to notice subtle changes in the room's atmosphere. The air seemed slightly warmer, a faint hint of the insulation's effectiveness. It was imperceptible to anyone else, but to him it was a quiet promise, a prelude to the comfort that awaited. His bare feet, though still chilled, seemed to sense the difference, the slightest softening underfoot suggesting that the floor was already beginning to perform its function. The anticipation was almost overwhelming, a mixture of excitement and anxiety that had him working faster while still maintaining perfect precision. The neighbors, of course, were still observing. Their skepticism had not entirely disappeared, but it had transformed into something more nuanced. Some whispered among themselves, a mixture of curiosity and disbelief in their tones. "Maybe he onto something," one remarked quietly. Another added, "I did think it would look so solid." Even the children from the neighborhood lingered nearby, peering through windows or around corners, their eyes wide with wonder. They had seen many unusual projects in their lives, but none quite like this. By mid-morning, the man began installing the final flooring pieces, carefully aligning each plank with the joists beneath. Nails and screws secured the boards in place, their rhythmic punctuations echoing softly throughout the room. He worked systematically, moving from one side of the room to the other, ensuring that every board was perfectly aligned and stable. Occasionally, he paused to check the level, adjusting as necessary to maintain a uniform surface. The work was exhausting, yet invigorating, a dance of precision and patience that demanded full attention. As the day progressed, the transformation became increasingly visible. The room, once cold, bare, and uninviting, now bore a smooth, continuous floor, subtly elevated above its original level. The hidden insulation beneath promised warmth, though the true measure of its effectiveness was still to be felt. He stepped across the completed sections carefully, testing their stability and listening to the faint creaks that confirmed the integrity of the construction. Each step was a rehearsal for the ultimate test, a quiet anticipation of the moment when warmth would finally rise through his feet. The neighbors. Reactions evolved as well. The whispers and laughter persisted, but there was an unmistakable note of curiosity, even admiration. One of the older men, previously a vocal skeptic, leaned against the fence, studying the floor through the window. "He is serious about this," he murmured. "I did think it would come together so well." Another neighbor nodded slowly, his early ridicule replaced by a cautious respect. Even the children seemed to sense the significance of the work, their eyes following every movement with fascination. With the floor fully installed and the edges sealed, the man added the final touches. He placed small wooden trim along the perimeter, ensuring that the transition between wall and floor was smooth and aesthetically pleasing. He checked for any remaining gaps, pressing insulation into tiny spaces that might have been overlooked. Each adjustment, no matter how minor, contributed to the overall effectiveness of the floor. The attention to detail was exhaustive, but he knew that the success of the project depended on these final refinements. As evening approached, he paused to admire the completed work. The floor, once a source of discomfort and frustration, now stood as a testament to ingenuity, perseverance, and careful planning. The room felt different already, subtly warmer and more inviting. He could sense the hidden layers of insulation beneath his feet, a quiet reservoir of comfort waiting to be revealed. The anticipation of experiencing that warmth firsthand filled him with a sense of triumph and satisfaction. The neighbors had gathered outside, their curiosity now mingled with awe. Some leaned over fences, peering through windows, their skepticism giving way to genuine interest. "I did. To think it would look so perfect," one whispered. Another added, "If it actually works, he is a genius." Their laughter had faded, replaced by a mixture of admiration and disbelief. The man, focused on his work, noticed their presence, but remained undistracted. The floor, as performance, would speak for itself, and he was confident it would surpass their expectations. With the final touches complete, he carefully stepped onto the new floor. The surface was smooth, stable, and solid underfoot, a stark contrast to the cold, unyielding boards he had endured for so long. He allowed himself a moment, standing still and feeling the subtle difference beneath his feet. There was a faint, almost imperceptible warmth, a gentle reassurance that the floor was performing as intended. The sensation, though slight, was enough to ignite a surge of excitement. He moved across the room, testing the stability and comfort of the newly completed floor. Each step reinforced his confidence, confirming that the construction was sound and the insulation effective. The hidden layers beneath his feet were no longer theoretical, they were tangible, performing exactly as he had envisioned. The cold that had once dominated his home was gradually being replaced by a quiet, controlled warmth. As night fell, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. The day had been long, exhausting, and demanding, but the results were undeniable. The floor, once a source of discomfort, had been transformed into a hidden layer of warmth, a sanctuary from the harsh winter outside. The neighbors, once skeptical and mocking, had been forced to recognize the ingenuity and determination behind the project. The laughter that had once filled the air had given way to a quiet awe, a subtle acknowledgement that the man's vision had been realized. He prepared for bed with a sense of anticipation that made the cold outside almost irrelevant. The ultimate test, the moment when warmth would rise fully through his feet, was still ahead, but he knew that the floor had been completed with precision, care, and dedication. The work of days, weeks, and months had culminated in this moment. A quiet triumph born of ingenuity, patience, and determination. Lying in bed, he imagined stepping onto the floor in the morning, feeling the full warmth that the hidden layers would provide. He pictured the reactions of the neighbors, their skepticism replaced by disbelief and admiration. The journey from idea to reality had been arduous, filled with labor, meticulous attention to detail, and the quiet challenge of ignoring ridicule. Yet the reward, the promise of warmth, comfort, and satisfaction was worth every effort. And as sleep claimed him, he felt a quiet exhilaration, a sense of accomplishment that was both profound and deeply personal. The floor, once cold and unyielding, now held within it the promise of warmth, a hidden layer of comfort that awaited discovery. Tomorrow, he would experience the full results, and the world, even the skeptical neighbors, would witness the brilliance of idea executed with patience, precision, and determination. The morning arrived crisp and clear, the sun spilling over the rooftops in pale streaks of gold that cut through the frosty haze. The man awoke with a sense of anticipation that made the biting cold of the floor beneath his bare feet almost bearable. He swung his legs over the edge of the bed, his toes brushing against the surface he had spent weeks transforming. He paused, holding his breath for a moment, sensing the subtle difference beneath him. The floor, once a cold and unyielding expanse, now carried a promise, a latent warmth that whispered of the comfort it was ready to deliver. The anticipation was almost tangible, a shiver of excitement that ran through him from head to toe, mingling with the lingering chill of the morning. He stood slowly, testing the surface with the ball of his foot. There was a faint but unmistakable difference, a subtle warmth that contrasted sharply with the icy floors he had endured for so long. He shifted his weight, stepping fully onto the floor, and felt the warmth deepen. It was gradual, almost imperceptible at first, but each step brought the sensation more fully into his consciousness. A smile spread across his face, wide and uncontainable, as he realized the extent of his success. The floor, his labor of love and determination, was performing exactly as he had envisioned. Excitement surged through him, mingling with relief and pride. He had not merely created a second layer of wood and insulation. He had engineered a solution to a problem that had plagued him for years. The cold floors that had once dominated his mornings, making each step a test of endurance, were now a source of warmth and comfort. His feet, once nearly numb when leaving the bed, now radiated heat, a tangible, physical reward for the meticulous planning and labor he had poured into the project. He moved across the room, testing the floor at various points, pressing his palms and toes against the surface to feel how the warmth spread. Each step confirmed the effectiveness of the insulation, the precision of the construction, and the ingenuity of the idea itself. The 33-degree difference he'd aimed for was no longer theoretical. It was real, perceptible, and transformative. His heart swelled with satisfaction, a quiet triumph that filled him with pride. This was more than a home improvement. It was a personal victory, a testament to perseverance, patience, and the courage to pursue an unconventional solution. The neighbors who had been lingering outside for days noticed the change immediately. Their whispers and laughter from previous mornings had faded, replaced by a tense curiosity as they observed him moving across the floor. Some peered through windows, while others lingered at the edges of the property, their expressions a mix of disbelief, intrigue, and dawning respect. One of the older men, who had been particularly vocal in his earlier ridicule, leaned closer to the fence, murmuring under his breath, "I can believe it actually works." Another neighbor, previously laughing at the sight of him, laboring with lumber and insulation, shook his head slowly, eyes wide with astonishment. He noticed their presence but remained focused on his own experience. Words were unnecessary. The floor itself was proof of his success. The warmth rising through his feet was a tangible statement, one that no amount of skepticism or mockery could deny. He walked deliberately, feeling the gradual increase in heat as his bare feet pressed against the surface. The sensation was profound, almost intoxicating, a reward that surpassed the labor, effort, and planning he had invested. Curiosity finally overcame the neighbors. Hesitation. One by one, they stepped closer, peering through windows or edging onto the porch to catch a better view. The young boy who had watched with wide eyes in previous days whispered in awe, It's warm. I can see it. I think it really is warm." His voice, filled with wonder and excitement, seemed to echo across the property, drawing attention from others who had doubted the feasibility of the project. The man, still testing the floor, smiled faintly, acknowledging their presence without breaking his focus. He had expected skepticism, laughter, and doubt, but the reactions now unfolding were even more gratifying than he could have imagined. He began moving around the room more freely, testing not only the warmth but also the stability of the floor. Each plank was solid, each joist hidden beneath performing flawlessly. The insulation was holding, the floorboards were smooth, and the heat beneath his feet radiated upward in a gentle, even manner. The difference was undeniable, the transformation complete. For years, mornings had been a battle against the cold. Now, each step was a pleasure, a quiet luxury that filled him with a sense of achievement he had never experienced before. The neighbors, emboldened by curiosity, began to approach more openly. Some crossed the street, others leaned over fences, and a few even stepped onto the porch to get a better view. Their expressions were a mixture of disbelief, admiration, and a hint of envy. The woman who had been particularly skeptical in previous days murmured, "Did think it would actually feel warm." Another neighbor, previously shaking his head in doubt, added, "It's incredible. I never imagined it could be this effective." The man, fully aware of their observations, continued moving carefully across the floor, demonstrating its stability and the consistent warmth beneath. He decided to invite them inside. One by one, the neighbors stepped cautiously across the threshold, their initial hesitation giving way to surprise as they felt the heat radiating upward. Some gasped audibly, while others exchanged incredulous glances. "It's amazing," one whispered. "It's actually warm. My feet are cold, but this This is warm. Their reactions, a combination of astonishment and reluctant admiration, provided a quiet validation of his ingenuity and determination. He had not merely solved a personal problem, he had created something remarkable, something that transformed not only his experience of winter, but also the perception of those around him. As they explored the room, touching the floor with their hands and stepping barefoot to feel the heat, the man explained nothing. Words were unnecessary, the results were self-evident. The floor was a hidden marvel, a layer of warmth carefully engineered to provide comfort and stability. Each step the neighbors took reinforced the effectiveness of the project, their skepticism replaced by astonishment and a growing appreciation for the effort and ingenuity involved. He moved among them, observing their reaction. The older man who had doubted him earlier shook his head slowly, muttering, "I can't believe it, I really did. Do you think it could work?" The woman who had been vocal in her ridicule smiled faintly, a mixture of amusement and awe crossing her face. Even the children, wide-eyed and whispering to one another, seemed captivated by the simple magic of the floor, the hidden layers of wood and insulation revealing their transformative power in a way that words could not capture. The man allowed himself to stand quietly, taking in the scene. For years, he had endured the cold, the discomfort, and the ridicule. Each morning had been a challenge, each step on the icy floor a test of endurance. Yet now, the reward was tangible and undeniable. The floor, once a source of frustration and discomfort, was a source of warmth and comfort, a testament to the value of perseverance, planning, and creative problem-solving. He walked across the room slowly, feeling the heat rise through his soles. The difference was dramatic, measurable in ways that were almost astonishing. The floor was 23 degrees warmer than it had been before, a tangible transformation that confirmed the effectiveness of his design. He could feel the warmth radiating outward, not only through his feet but subtly warming the surrounding air, creating a cocoon of comfort within the modest room. The neighbors continued to explore, each discovering the floor's effectiveness for themselves. Some removed their shoes, stepping cautiously to experience the warmth firsthand. Their faces lit with surprise and delight, expressions ranging from awe to disbelief. "I can believe this," one muttered. "It is perfect." Another nodded, slowly taking off his socks to feel the warmth directly. "I never thought a floor could make such a difference," he admitted, his earlier skepticism now replaced by admiration. The man watched quietly, allowing them to experience the floor fully before speaking. There was no need for explanation. The warmth, the stability, and the ingenuity of the construction spoke for themselves. The hidden layers of insulation, carefully measured joists, and precisely cut planks had created a floor that was more than just a surface. It was a transformative experience, a quiet triumph of patience, planning, and determination. As the morning progressed, word of the remarkable floor spread through the neighborhood. People who had previously dismissed his idea as absurd now approached with curiosity and respect. Some offered hesitant congratulations, while others asked questions about the materials, the process, and the principles behind the construction. The man answered sparingly, allowing his work to remain the central focus. He had accomplished what he set out to do. He had created warmth, comfort, and astonishment, all in one modest, unassuming room. By afternoon, the initial astonishment had given way to a quiet appreciation. The neighbors, previously skeptical and mocking, now seemed to understand the ingenuity and effort behind the project. They walked across the floor deliberately, testing its stability and warmth, and each step reinforced their admiration. The man, observing silently, felt a deep satisfaction that transcended pride. He had not merely solved a problem, he had demonstrated the power of persistence, creativity, and careful planning in the face of doubt and ridicule. As evening approached, he stood in the center of the room, basking in the quiet warmth beneath his feet. The neighbors had returned to their homes, still murmuring in amazement, their skepticism replaced by a reluctant acknowledgement of the man. Brilliance. The floor, now fully functional and remarkably effective, had transformed not only his personal experience of winter, but also the perception of those around him. He allowed himself a rare moment of reflection, closing his eyes and feeling the heat radiate upward. The journey from a simple desire to keep his feet warm had evolved into a testament of ingenuity and determination. He had faced ridicule, doubt, and physical challenges, yet the result was undeniable. A floor that was 33 degrees warmer, stable, and meticulously constructed. The sensation beneath his feet was more than comfort, it was validation, a confirmation that perseverance and creativity could yield remarkable results. As night fell, he prepared for bed with a sense of quiet triumph. The floor had been tested, proven, and admired. The neighbors, reactions once mocking and skeptical, had evolved into astonishment and respect. He lay down, allowing the warmth to continue radiating through the room, a gentle, comforting presence that contrasted with the chill outside. The reward for his labor was complete, the culmination of weeks of meticulous planning, preparation, and construction now fully realized. And as sleep claimed him, he felt a profound satisfaction, a deep sense of accomplishment that was both personal and shared. The floor, once an obstacle and source of discomfort, had become a hidden marvel, delivering warmth, comfort, and quiet astonishment to all who experienced it. Tomorrow, he would wake once more to the difference beneath his feet, a tangible, transformative success that had begun as a simple idea and grown into a remarkable reality. The days that followed felt different, not because the weather had changed, but because something subtle in the air between the houses had shifted. Winter still pressed against the windows each morning. Frost still painted delicate patterns across the glass. The wind still carried its sharp bite down the narrow street. But inside his home, beneath his feet, there was warmth, steady, reliable, undeniable warmth. And outside, among the people who had once laughed, there was now something unfamiliar: respect. He noticed it first in the silence. Where there had once been chuckles and whispered comments when he stepped outside, there were now nods. Curious glances had replaced smirks. Conversations paused when he walked by, not out of mockery, but out of consideration. The neighbors who once leaned on their fences with folded arms and raised eyebrows now straightened slightly when he approached, as if unsure how to address him. The older man who had laughed the loudest during the early days of construction was the first to speak openly. "You know," he said one afternoon, clearing his throat as the man checked his mailbox, "I've been thinking about that floor of yours." The man looked up, calm and steady. "Have you?" The older man nodded slowly. "My wife complains every winter, says the kitchen tiles feel like ice. I never gave it much thought." He hesitated. "You mind explaining how you did it?" There it was. Not ridicule, not doubt. A request. He did T smile broadly or boast. He simply nodded and invited him inside. Word spread quickly after that. By the end of the week, 3 neighbors had stepped barefoot across his living room, each one reacting the same way. A moment of disbelief, then widening eyes, then a quiet shake of the head as if trying to rewrite what they thought they understood about warmth and construction. "It does to even feel artificial," one woman said, pressing her palm against the surface. "It just feels comfortable." That was the part that pleased him most. He hadn't wanted something flashy. He hadn't installed visible heating coils or loud mechanical systems. The beauty of the design was its invisibility. The warmth rose gently, naturally, without hum or glare. It simply existed because he had thought differently. Children began asking questions too. The young boy who had watched from the fence now knocked on his door one Saturday morning, notebook in hand. "Can you show me the layers?" he asked eagerly, "like how it works?" The man considered the request carefully. Then he led him to a small leftover section of framing and insulation he had kept in the corner. He showed him the joists, the spacing, the insulation thickness, the sealing technique. "It is not magic," he explained quietly. "It is just understanding how heat moves. Most people try to fight the cold from above. I decided to block it from below." The boy scribbled furiously. That moment meant more to him than the admiration of adults. Because curiosity, unlike pride, builds something lasting. Soon, small groups gathered in his living room in the evenings, not large crowds, just 2 or 3 neighbors at a time. They would step inside, remove their shoes, and stand there quietly, feeling the difference. Conversations shifted from disbelief to possibility. "Do you think it would work in a bigger house? What about concrete floors? How thick did you make the frame?" He answered patiently, carefully, never exaggerating. He spoke about preparation being more important than speed, about sealing edges properly, about measuring twice before cutting once, about insulation density, about airflow and trapped thermal pockets. But he also spoke about something deeper. "I was trying to prove anyone wrong," he said one evening when the older woman who once mocked him asked why he stuck with the project despite the laughter. "I was just tired of waking up uncomfortable in my own home." That answer silenced the room, because that was something everyone understood: comfort, dignity, the desire to solve your own problem instead of complaining about it. The shift in the neighborhood became visible in small ways. One man began reinforcing his attic insulation, another sealed gaps under his doors. Someone else installed thicker underlayment in a bedroom renovation. The street, once content with tolerating winter, was now quietly adapting to it. And each improvement traced back to one thing: someone who refused to accept discomfort as permanent. The most surprising moment came 2 weeks later. The same older man who had once laughed openly knocked on his door again. This time he was curious, he was serious. "I bought the materials," he said, holding up a receipt and a rolled blueprint. "Think you could help me build it?" There was no hesitation. They worked side by side over the next several days. The neighbors who once stood outside whispering now carried lumber. They measured. They cut. they learned. And as the second raised floor began taking shape down the street, something even warmer than insulation spread through the neighborhood. Pride. Not the loud, boastful kind, but the quiet pride of shared effort, of learning, of admitting you were wrong and choosing growth instead of stubbornness. The transformation ones, tea just in wood and nails. It was in perspective. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the air grew sharp again, the man stood barefoot in his living room, looking out the window. Across the street, he could see the faint outline of a new floor frame through another home's open doorway. He remembered the laughter. He remembered carrying lumber alone while others shook their heads. He remembered the sting not of the cold but of being dismissed. And now the same people were measuring joist spacing. Did he feel vindicated? He felt grateful, because the true success of his project was to the 33-degree difference beneath his feet. It was the 80-degree difference in mindset around him. Winter continued. Snow fell. Wind howled. The season did what it always did. But inside the homes along that quiet street, something had changed permanently. People began questioning assumptions. They started asking, is there a better way? Instead of saying, that is just how it is. His floor became more than a solution. It became a story. Visitors from nearby streets came to see it. Some came out of curiosity. Others came with quiet skepticism. But almost all left thoughtful. He never charged money. He never advertised. He never bragged. He simply demonstrated. And demonstration, he learned, is stronger than argument. Months later, when winter finally loosened its grip and the first signs of spring crept into the air, the floors remained. Hidden, quiet, effective. The neighbors no longer laughed when someone tried something unconventional. In fact, the tone of the street had shifted entirely. When a young couple painted their house an unusual color, no one mocked them. When another neighbor experimented with solar panels, people asked questions instead of scoffing. Something fundamental had changed. Innovation was no longer strange. It was respected. On a mild evening, as the last patches of snow melted away, the man sat barefoot on his warm floor, a cup of tea resting beside him. The room was peaceful, comfortable. Still, he thought about how simple the original frustration had been. Cold feet, that was all. But sometimes, small discomforts reveal larger truths. He had learned that ridicule fades when results appear. He had learned that most laughter comes from misunderstanding, not malice. He had learned that patience is louder than defense. And perhaps most importantly, he had learned that you don't need approval to build something better. Outside, children ran along the sidewalk. One of them stopped near his porch and shouted to another, "Did you know he built a floor on top of his floor?" The other child replied, "Yeah, and it's warm." They ran off, laughing, not mocking laughter, but delighted laughter. The kind that carries wonder instead of doubt. He smiled to himself. The floor beneath him radiated steady warmth, but the greater warmth came from knowing he had changed more than his own home. He had changed a habit. The habit of dismissing ideas too quickly. The habit of laughing before understanding. The habit of settling for discomfort because it is familiar. The next winter would come, as it always did. The wind would return. Frost would creep across glass. The cold would press against foundations. But now, along that quiet street, it would meet something different. Preparation, creativity, courage, and floors that were 33 degrees warmer than before. The man leaned back, feeling the heat beneath him, steady and earned. He built a second floor just to keep his feet warm. He had built proof that thinking differently, quietly, patiently, persistently can warm an entire community. And that was something no winter could ever freeze.